I first arrived on campus, and I was looking through the course packets, and I saw the Arab-Israeli conflict, and I saw Palestinian and Israeli culture and politics, and I got really excited because I can learn about all of these things and get credit for it. Yeah. And so I was looking through all of these different courses, and a friend of mine said, that's probably not a good idea.
Columbia and Barnard are great schools, and there's a huge, vibrant Jewish life on campus. But for students who want a comfortable environment in which to talk about Israel and the Middle East, there's a problem. And different people have experienced the problem in different ways, but it's not just a few isolated incidents or a few concerned students. It's a situation where students who want an honest discussion of the Middle East on campus are being silenced, and it's a problem that starts with professors.
There's definitely an intimidation factor. People don't feel like they can express their points of views in classrooms or in their assignments for professors.
I didn't realize also at the time how many incidents actually were happening on campus at the same time. So I thought, oh my God, I had this terrible isolated incident. It must be me. He really thought that, which unfortunately, I'm a strong, confident woman. And, when I hear about these kind of things with other people, I'm like, I should have said something. Come on, you know better than that. But at the time I thought, listen, I don't want to get this professor in trouble.
I think the administration is not responsive to what's going on campus because it doesn't see it so much as a threat. It's intellectually popular and justified nowadays to criticize Israel and to question its legitimacy.
In the time that I spent at MELAC, I had some really amazing professors who I think really did their best to foster open dialogue, including George El-Hajj, Tawfiq ibn Ammar, who we read a very sensitive book, and I think he really handled it really well. At the same time, though, I had some really, really bad experiences.
I'd say the last 5 years of my work, I began to hear criticisms and comments from our students, particularly about the MELAC department. And I would say to students many times, you have to understand that if you're approaching this as an academic, one has to see it through norms of scholarship. What was different about the few people we've been speaking about here is that their objectivity was questioned because of their activism and their advocacy, and also some of the exchanges with students which are being documented in this film, which meant that some of the faculty really were intimidating when they got questions which they felt represented a non-pro-Arab, pro-Palestinian point of view. How does a professor really handle representing an academic discipline in the classroom and to become an advocate outside before alma mater on campus walk at a rally? And when I wrote that up in Spectator, I thought it was a rather benign and appropriate question. The reaction, candidly, was, was astounding. There were two pieces that were written, one by Professor Dabashi, the other one by Professor Saliba, which attacked me personally. One of them said that it's like I'm starting the Spanish Inquisition, and that I am, no rabbi has the right to question the principles of academic freedom. What was written about me in Spectator by these two faculty indicates that here I am, an adult, an older person, rabbi, etc., etc. I had been at this university, I think, 32 years, and these two attacked me personally. And believe me, it rolls off my back, doesn't hurt me personally at all. But if that's not an example of intimidation, I mean, they said to me, Rabbi, don't even preach, don't even dare to teach. So if this is what they're willing to do to me in public, in writing, you can imagine what they're willing to do to students in the classroom.
The professors who do deal with the Middle East tend to shift the focus from those grievances of Middle Eastern regimes to what's happening in Israel. It never really has to do with the real abuses of human rights, the much more severe abuses of human rights that happen in countries such as Sudan and Syria and Egypt and on and on and on.
I took Professor Saliba's Intro to Islamic Civilization. At the end of the semester, I guess the icing on the cake was that we saw a video about contemporary politics in the Middle East. And without any framing at all, we witnessed a video that showed a march of Arabs from the region, annual march, in which they hold up banners that say "Death to Zionism," and they chanted slogans like "Death to Jews." While that may be an accurate portrayal of what goes on in the Middle East, I was kind of surprised that he didn't frame it with anything like, "This is not my perspective," or "What you're going to see here may bother you a little bit."
In the spring of my freshman year, I took a course called Contemporary Islamic Civilization with Professor George Saliba. One day I walked into class and he started a speech. He was on stage in front of the class. His face was red with anger. He was shouting. He said that this is a course in contemporary Islamic civilization and that it can't get more contemporary than the events that are unfolding right now in the Middle East. He said that he's well aware of Ariel Sharon's history, which is one that includes Sabra and Shatila, and that he knows that another Sabra and Shatila is taking place right now in Jenin. He said that Sharon is obviously trying to hide the massacre that he's committing. He said that class was canceled, and he invited the class to follow him to the low library steps where a Palestinian sit-in was taking place. During his speech, he didn't stop to take any questions or comments. Honestly, no student would think of asking a question in the atmosphere that this professor created. That was a pretty scary experience because I realized that all of these students who don't know any better are sitting in a course being told something by a professor who they are assuming knows what he's talking about and is a credible source.
I took a class with George Saliba, the Introduction to Islamic Civilization. Towards the end of the semester, Professor Saliba showed what I felt was an anti-Israel film, showing the contemporary conflict between Palestinians and Israelis, with a very one-sided view. The film and Saliba presented a view that Arabs have a prior claim to the land of Israel. And I felt very differently about that, and I was sure to express my opinion. For a few minutes, we discussed it inside the classroom, and then George Saliba sort of drew me outside the classroom and told me to walk with him on his way out. And on our way out, we actually stood on College Walk right outside for 45 minutes, where I debated with him about the fact that the Jewish people have been in Israel for thousands of years. He said, you have no voice in this debate. So I said, of course I'm allowed to express, my opinion, he said. Came real close to me, and he moved down his glasses, and he looked right into my eyes, and he said, see, you have green eyes. He said, you're not a Semite. He said, I'm a Semite. I have brown eyes. He said, you have no claim to the land of Israel. As if my ancestors were not there. As if I'm not really a Jew because I have green eyes. I was stunned and never approached him after that, and that's exactly what he wanted to do. He wanted to intimidate me and keep me quiet. And I was. I'm an alumna, and now I'm sort of removed from the incident. I'm not afraid of Saliba anymore, and it's all about the intimidation factor. I finally feel comfortable to discuss it for the sake of future graduates and future students who this might happen to. Let them know, A, they're not alone, and this happened to me, and that they have to speak up.
I did go to Professor Saliba after I had completed the course. My basic first question was something like, Professor, why is it that we've been in the class a whole year and we've been talking about the Middle East, and every time Israel comes up, it's been referred to as Palestine, which is not really a politically accurate term. And I'm not even sure if I finished my sentence completely until, by the time he had already started with, oh, so that's the axe that you have to grind. Why is Israel being called Palestine in my class? What about the plight of the Palestinians? Why isn't that what you're talking to me about? Why don't you come to me and ask me why we aren't trying to help the Palestinians in the Middle East? So immediately I was under attack from my professor. His kind of escape route of saying, well, you're inconsiderate, and he did use the word inconsiderate to the plight of the Palestinians, that didn't really work because he had still done something wrong in the classroom, and he escalated into some yelling, and he proceeded to give me the following analogy. He says, these are preemptive strikes. If I got up to hit you right now, and he starts moving out of his chair, if I got up to hit you, wouldn't you hit me first? And I said, moving my chair back slowly, I said, no, I wouldn't hit you first. I would walk away from you and say, until you're ready to talk, I'm not ready to reciprocate. And just the use of rhetoric, the use of yelling, the whole situation was really uncomfortable. Really, without any warning at all, after he had gotten me into a very emotional place, after he was all worked up, he basically kicked me out. I'm sorry, I can't talk to you anymore about this. You have to go. I have students waiting to talk to me. And I walked out of a door, which had been open the entire time, and I just saw his secretarial staff, mouths wide open, shocked.
Another incident that occurred that made me feel somewhat uncomfortable occurred in Professor Anijar's class. It was the day of the pro-Palestinian sit-in. He did not cancel class. He had us all come to class, and he then proceeded to give us a 15-minute speech about how there's an important text happening on College Walk. He thinks we should all go read it, essentially telling us to go to the pro-Palestinian sit-in. And then he canceled class, and we said, wait a second, you called us here in the first place. You didn't send us an email to let us know, don't show up because I'm going to the sit-in because this is my personal feeling. Let us discuss what you're doing. Let us discuss the issue. He said no discussion, and he left. So I just felt like that was totally inappropriate for a college environment.
I took a class called Palestinian-Israeli Politics and Societies, taught by Professor Joseph Massad. And I was very excited for the class because I wanted to educate myself on all facets of the situation, and I didn't want to keep my focus on what I had learned from my day school background, so I was excited to get a new perspective and to learn about politics from a different perspective. I quickly came to realize from the very first day of class that this was going to be a very biased class, only showing a strongly anti-Israel perspective. I renamed the class to myself, Why Israel is Racist, and he was teaching the class about the Jenin incidents, and a girl raised her hand and tried to bring up an alternative point of view, and before she could get her point across, he quickly demanded and shouted at her, "I will not have anyone sit through this class and deny Israeli atrocities," which pretty much limited the student's ability even to question him or to bring up an alternative point of view.
I was basically new in New York. My English wasn't good then. And I was very impressed by this professor. He has very good English. He gave a very good lecture. There were about 20, 30 people in the room. But throughout the lecture, I realized that he missed a lot of points. Certain aspects of the Israeli-Palestinian history were just not there. Others were emphasized. I wouldn't call it lies, but they were half-truths. At the end of his lecture, I raised my hand and wanted to ask him some questions about the things I thought that he missed. And basically, I raised my hand. I said, "Hello, my name is Tommy. I'm Israeli, and I would like to ask you some questions." And before I could continue, he stopped me and said, "Oh, are you Israeli? You served in the IDF?" I said, "Yes." So his next question was, "How many Palestinians have you killed?" I was shocked because I didn't came there with any antagonism or any bias towards him. And I asked him, how come it's relevant to this discussion? And he said, "No, it's relevant, and I demand you to answer. How many Palestinians have you killed?" And I said, "I'm not going to answer, but I'm going to ask you a question. How many members of your family celebrated on September 11th? If we're starting with stereotypes." And then he blew up and he started yelling, and the entire room, just like everybody yelled at everybody, and basically the discussion was over at that point.
Joseph Mossad is probably one of the most dangerous intellectuals or self-proclaimed intellectuals on campus. Not for the great majority of his views, but for the fact that he uses the classroom as a platform for political propaganda, which is baseless, and which has just a level of dishonesty in its presentation. His favorite description is the Palestinian as the new Jew and the Jew as the new Nazi.
One example he used to demonstrate was that Zion, the foundation for Zionism, Zion in Hebrew was penis, so therefore, it's a big masculine movement. But anybody who has even a little bit of knowledge of Hebrew knows that Zionism in Hebrew is Tzion, so it's not even the same word. And we pointed that out in class, and I think he was a little shocked.
And as a major, Milak is just not an option. I can't find myself studying with a professor that I'll be constantly arguing with, not so much because it's a different viewpoint, because I do very much appreciate it. And my experiences with Palestinians and with our other Arab youth are very dear to me, in that they challenged my assumptions and made me think of things in a new way. But just the rampant kind of hate that's being propagated.
Columbia produces phenomenal leaders in the United States. It's a world-class institution. If the exposure to the Middle East that they're getting here is not a balanced one, then it's not the Columbia education. It's the role that Columbia should be playing. And if faculty will understand that and say, we care about Columbia. So I spoke out not because I'm the Rabbi Hillel director. That was, of course, sufficient motivation, but because I also care about Columbia. And it pained me when a student would come to me and say, "Well, can I take this course in Milak?" And I would have to kind of squirm in my chair and say, "Well, listen, you have to keep your blinders on, but et cetera, et cetera."
There was one film which depicted Israeli soldiers raping Palestinian women as if it were factual. And the worst part about the whole festival was that there really wasn't any room to discuss what was being presented and to bring in differing points of views.
In order to understand that, it's perfectly appropriate to show these films and to step back and to analyze them. What upset many of us was the way in which the analysis was presented, or that it seemed to be a celebration of advocacy on behalf of, without the critical type of perspective that should take place at an institution like Columbia. the Palestinian Film Festival that MELAC sponsored, and it was very clear that it was a presentation of a very different sort. And it's what has been called advocacy advocation, and which is a term which was presented in a Spectator article by Professor Richard Bullitt, who had been the director of the Middle East Institute. He said that one has to be very concerned about advocacy education, where an individual professor, I would say a course or a department, presents itself not as a scholar of, a student of a particular period or a context, but where you're advocating a particular position, where people, the students, are being encouraged to see something from a particular perspective. I remember what would happen when students would come to me and report these incidences. And what could I really say to them other than, well, first of all, you have to go back to the professor. Maybe you misheard them. Talk it through. And then if that's not the case, they actually said that, the next thing I would say to them is, well, you have to talk to the chair of your department. And if that gave you no recourse, you'd have to go to talk to the dean. Honestly, I know what happened after I gave them my carefully, softly, gently, couched advice. None of the students ever would do that. It takes an awful lot of ego strength for a 17, 18, 19, 20-year-old student to go back to a professor and to challenge them. I was very disappointed, and disappointed in myself, too, not able to get more people to speak out on these issues.
This summer I researched how to file a formal complaint within the university system, and so what I did was I spoke to the provost's office and the ombud's office and the dean of students' office, and they all directed me to one another. And really, I asked them if there was a sheet I could fill out or questions I could answer. They said no, and they said the only way that I could really file a formal complaint was to speak to the department chair, which is totally ineffective considering the fact that the department chair is not an independent body and could be the person that you're complaining about. It's clear that the university is saying that there's been no formal grievance ever filed, but it's pretty obvious why it's never been filed, considering the fact that it's so inaccessible and really not user-friendly at all. So how is someone really supposed to successfully and effectively file a complaint?
And so I went to Dean Noutrakis thinking that, I don't know what I thought I would hear. I'd assume a sympathetic ear. But I really went to her thinking that the way you get things done is by going to an administrator. When I said to her, Dean Noutrakis, I think that what I experienced here was politics inside of the classroom, she said, well, aren't you from a very Jewish background? Is it possible that you're mistaking someone else's views for discrimination against your own? And I said, well, anything's possible, but I don't think that's what's going on. And it just seemed to me that she had already made up her mind. That what was going on was a case of, a small town girl in a big town college, and I felt patronized.
I brought with me to my meeting with Dean Noutrakis just a brief sketch of what had occurred in the classroom with Professor Saliba. She pushed the issue away from that and instead made me feel as though it were my own fault that I felt intimidated in the classroom. When I left the dean's office, I was crying. I felt that my words had been so manipulated, had been so moved away from what I had really wanted to discuss. And I felt that if I can't speak to the Dean of Academic Affairs about this, there really is no one else that I can go to.
In the language lab here, anti-Semitic literature was put up on the walls, showing Jews as the classical money-grubbing, greedy user of Gentiles.
One incident that disturbed me and made me feel personally uncomfortable practically for the rest of the semester occurred in one of my early Arabic classes where I had asked the professor used the word mana'a, which means to prevent in Arabic, and it's similar to the Hebrew word limnoa, so I was really interested as an early Arabic student, explain that to me. I asked him how to use the verb, and he wrote on the board, Israel prevents ambulances from going into refugee camps. Now, I'm not sure why he decided to write that day, had something happened in the news or what the case may be, but I have to say that I really don't think he would have said that had I not been wearing this on my head, and it really made me feel really uncomfortable.
We were putting up posters for the Israeli Film Festival last year, and almost immediately they were defaced with swastikas or with Free Palestine in Arabic or with other things that you'd never see on a Palestinian film festival poster.
And I had attended a lecture, more like a panel discussion, that was sponsored by Tureth, one of the Arab culture groups on campus, that was titled, "Should Columbia Divest?" ? Not a single speaker talked about the cons of divestment. I'd raised my hand to ask a question after all the speakers had spoken, and I asked, when I saw the flyers for this event, it said, "Should Columbia divest?" And can you please explain why you didn't bring any speakers who are against divestment, who can at least show some of the nuances of the issue? Each speaker continued to obfuscate and avoid the question, but what really bothered me was afterwards, many students who were in the audience would raise their hands, and instead of directing the questions to the panelists, would turn around to me and point to me and say things like, "Just remember who are the oppressed and who's the oppressor. You are the occupier." And just because I was wearing my yarmulke and I'm Jewish, here they turn to me, and this is what these monolithic panel discussions do, is they foster this incitement where you really get this boulder that's just rolling of really hate-filled ideas, and students then turn on fellow students just because of their religion. And here I am, I'm sitting here just, defenseless, and all these people are starting to really heat up the room. I started to get scared. I had heard of stories in other universities of Jewish students being attacked, and in my mind there was no reason that it couldn't happen here.
And one of the socialist girl came to us, started yelling at us that we have no right standing there and being there. And I basically told her, listen, this is America, right? We're not in Iraq or in any other country, and we're allowed to be here if you want to. We're allowed to listen. And then she just looked me in the eye and say, "You have no right, to tell me what to do. You are an IDF rapist."
It's been hard to get a good, solid support from the Jewish or pro-Israel professors, especially at Columbia.
And when you have professors all on one side exercising their right of freedom of speech, and no professors on the other side exercising their right of freedom of speech, again, it creates an environment in which only one point of view is put forth.
Whether faculty are frightened to speak out because it might affect their careers, I have heard this. I know about it in a few instances. My sense is that that's unacceptable today. It's unacceptable because there's so many communities at universities where people do speak up. Using your brains and working in academia likewise is a service which should be non-discriminatory. And indeed, universities are the more progressive places. So Jews began to gravitate because of our tradition of scholarship and because they were open venues for Jewish employment. And only if you're an oppressed minority are you willing to speak up and to bring your identity with you onto the campus. Many Jewish faculty still have that attitude. They have to be universalists. They can't bring their own genuine, unique identities here. And I think that's a plague which, unfortunately, still afflicts us, even when we really need these folks most.
I can count the professors that have given their active support on my fingers, but most of them are on one hand, on two fingers.
I think that the Columbia administration should probably do something when professors, cross the line and accuse students like me of killing Arabs or other examples that I've heard.
And I feel that the administration has a responsibility to ensure that professors treat their students with a certain amount of respect and an appropriate sensitivity. Harassing students because they express pro-Israel views or are identifiably Israeli should be treated no differently than harassing students because they're black or because they're gay. The administration should insist the Middle East Studies Department put an end to a politicized agenda and that it look critically at all the countries in the Middle East. We really need to diversify the Middle East Studies curriculum and to get a more diverse faculty as well.
Columbia has the charge of raising the new generation, the next generation of leaders. And leaders can't lead unless they have enough information.
We just want honesty. We want to feel comfortable expressing views in the classroom that might not be the views that the professors themselves hold. We just want to make a safe and good educational environment.
They know what Columbia is. They know what Columbia can be. And if they don't help, unfortunately, nothing's going to get done.
Columbia University President Lee Bollinger said the student accounts in the David Project film, Columbia Unbecoming, are troubling, and we take them very seriously. Columbia University does not condone the intimidation of students or discrimination of any kind. And they want any student who feels that they've been discriminated against or intimidated in any way to be able to complain about any professor without fearing for their grades.
Columbia's president, calling it a serious matter, has appointed the university provost to investigate the allegations. The provost is evaluating the film and will compose the university's response.